Hey, hey, hey. Jeff Brown here, rolling on with a series of layout tutorials. So we talked a little bit about, types of layout, the parameters, animations. I thought I'd level with you and share some of my best practices and a couple of gotchas that you might encounter on your epic adventure. So we talked about layout and how it may not always be WYSIWYG. So even if the positions were off and we were to test this layout, the layout's going to override what we did in After Effects and basically align all of this stuff for us. Now, if you didn't want them aligned, then, well, maybe you don't need layout, or maybe you should be using auto layout, because that's going to be closer to WYSIWYG. But you guys already knew that, right? So, rolling forward, just another example of something that we might want to do. If say perhaps we want to take this red square and put it at the bottom of the layout rather than at the top. You think, well, Jeff, that's quite simple. You just move the object to the bottom of the artboard and that's going to appear at the bottom of the screen. Well, no, actually, that's not how it works. Instead of checking the position of the artboard within After Effects, the code actually looks at the layer order in the stack here. So since this piece of content is first, it's going to be drawn first. It's going to be the first item that appears in that layout. If we really want it to appear at the bottom, regardless of where it is on the page, you need to change the layer order. So by dragging this layer down to the bottom of that stack, and if I re-preview this piece of content, we can now see that, yes, our content has been rearranged the way that we'd like. So that's a pretty big piece right there. I'm glad we were able to catch together. So other than that, there's a really interesting concept, and it's the difference between sizing and scaling. It might seem trivial. Well, they almost mean the same thing, but in this case, it's a little bit different, where resizing is really changing the size of the container for this text, and scaling is just scaling the content itself. So pretty contrasting example of two different ways to do the same thing but completely different results. You might want one or the other, but just being aware of the differences between sizing and scaling is going to make you a more versatile guru. So other than these sections, there's one other piece that I wanted to show, and that would be anchors. So we have resizing anchors, and they have a pretty cool ability to work with layout to properly, scale or size content. So I'm going to open up this example file here, and what I'm going to do is just remove that sizing anchor. I'll walk through this step. But this is an example prototype for a 10-foot application. And if I were to toggle through this stuff, then you can see some of the animations here, and all of the text is dynamic as well, so it all shuffles around, done pretty well, if I do say so myself. But if I were to resize this window, if it were to show up on a different kind of platform, and oh geez, the text still looks okay, but our images are all squished and squashed, and that's a cardinal sin when it comes to design. You can't really augment these images that much. It's not the way it's meant to be. So how can we fix this? We've done our layout, we have our parameters in here, but there has to be something that can prevent this or work with it. And in this case, I have a sizing anchor. So what I had done there, we have a few different anchors going on for the background, just to make sure that it scales proportionately. But this sizing anchor is basically going to speak to this layout and say, you go here, you do that, you scale up, and you stay as is. Pretty magical. So to work with this, I'm just going to parent this layer. I can use the little pick whip here, or I can choose from the drop down which anchor I'd like. You can add the anchors from the composition menu. I won't go through all of them, but we do have a lot of documentation if you are interested to know the differences between proportional scaling and width and height and things like that. Sizing is the one that we're going to use primarily for layouts. So if I were to test this again with that anchor, hopefully we'll have an improved result. So everything looks good. Now if I were to resize this, yes, I'm getting the images to scale proportionately, or in this case, they're resizing rather than rescaling. So super versatile. It allows us to cover a wider variety of platforms without having to create unique layouts for each instance. So just a couple of things to look out for. Happy to share the information with you. Let's move on to the next one. Bye.